Okay, and we are entering. Boy, I forget which part we're on. But we just got done talking about food webs, food chains, the difference between the two, and hopefully you've taken some time to kind of investigate some food webs of your own. Here's a sample I like to use. It's very generic, very basic, but it definitely gets the point across that we're trying to make here, and that is that food webs are very complex. And oftentimes we don't even know everything involved within the food web. Okay, we don't know. Yes, we know the direction these arrows are going. Yes, we know which arrows are going to where. But oftentimes we don't know how heavily dependent certain organisms are on particular pathways. We might know that um, these fish are getting eaten by these birds over here, but we don't know necessarily what extent of the bird's diet is coming from this lake, et cetera. We don't know a lot of different conditions. We just know that this relationship exists. It bears to question one of my things that I think we should all think about, and that is what should happen if a species is removed from that food web. So here's another look at a really basic food web, and it's not the format that I usually like here, but we'll make it work. But let's say, if you get rid of the insect, it's common for people to spray insecticide, whether it's agriculture or for residential areas or for commercial areas. People don't like mosquitoes. Okay, so they will spray insecticides over a place and 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 wipe out a lot of bugs that are in the area. Well, if you look in this particular graph here, if we get rid of the grasshopper, now all of a sudden our lizard has no source of food. So we're going to get rid of this lizard. Um, that also is going to get rid of these couple lines. We're going to get rid of this grasshopper for the bird over here. And so we lose a couple species coming out of this ecosystem. And now all of a sudden, snakes are more heavily reliant on mice. Hawks are more heavily reliant on some of these other animals. Birds have to rely solely on vegetation. And so, especially species like birds, they might choose to migrate to a different source and they might leave the ecosystem, meaning that our hawk has to rely on fewer species. It might be tougher for snakes to hunt mice, and so their numbers might be down. And so, we see that maybe the food web collapses in extreme examples, but oftentimes it gets so the pressure within that food web changes and it puts stresses on other species to kind of pick up the slack from that one missing species. So when we removed one species from a food web, that throws other areas off balance. We saw that with our looking at Yellowstone wolves and that keystone predator, is that when we remove the wolves, that throws kind of everything else out of balance. And we see that a lot in the Midwest. In the Midwest, our deer populations are, huge. They're through the roof. We're having diseases like chronic wasting disease. Deer are massively expensive because they keep getting, hit by cars and all of that stuff. And so we're trying our best as a society to replace that wolf top predator with humans during hunting season. It's a start. It helps. It's maybe not enough effort. Um, it's not as constant of a pressure as having those top predators around. Today's notes, we're going to keep talking about food chains and food webs. And we're going to talk about kind of a topic that you are familiar with, but maybe haven't named before. And that is the idea of a trophic level. And what a trophic level is it just tells us what level on the food chain an organism's at. Okay, we know we have producers or autotrophs. We know we have herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and so basically, when we look at trophic levels, it's just okay, where at in a food chain can a particular organism be found? That's the take home from that there. This is going to be important because we are going to talk about. Here, I'm sorry. Here's a look at those different trophic levels. But we're going to be talking about how energy moves through ecosystems today. And that's a big concept that we're going to have. It's maybe more of a, we're going to do some math. And so it's a little bit more of a complicated concept. But in our trophic levels, I like this graph because it shows this pyramid shape to it. And that's not an accident. Okay, so the pyramid shape is on purpose because as we move through a food chain, we should see fewer and fewer organisms along the way. Right? Like I said, we've been talking about the Yellowstone wolves and that ecosystem. There's tens of thousands of elk in Yellowstone National Park. There's about 90 wolves. All right, and that should be a ratio that makes sense. There, you wouldn't have 10,000 elk and also 10,000 wolves because a wolf pack needs to eat an elk every few days. And so you need a larger number of herbivores than those carnivores. And that's going to be true throughout. We need more of the lower levels of a food chain than the top carnivores as we're going. And that is because of energy transfer here. So energy in our food chains, in our ecosystems, all the ones that we're talking about get their energy from the sun. There are some deep sea marine ecosystems that are able to process energy from some of the thermal vents deep in the ocean. Those are pretty rare and work a little bit differently. We're going to focus on the ones that we're familiar with here on the surface, and that is the sun is our energy source. So plants use photosynthesis to convert that solar energy into chemical energy. However, each time that energy is passed on, um, it is an inefficient transfer. So as a potato plant is absorbing all of that sunlight energy to create chemical energy, if we eat the potatoes, we do not get 100% of that solar energy transferred onto us. All right, because on each step of the way, if we look back at my chart here, organisms are losing energy to heat loss, to metabolism, to just doing their everyday things. And so our rule of thumb is about 10,000, or I'm sorry, not 10,000, 10% of energy is passed on to the next level. So let's say a rabbit consumed 5,000 calories in their lifetime. If you eat that rabbit, that's going to be about 500 calories. All right, that should make sense. We know as people that our bodies need to burn 2,000 calories a day just to stay active, just to stay alive. Those 2,000 calories don't get stored; they get burned off as you're going. So, a general rule of thumb that is kind of accepted for biology classes is that 10% of that energy gets passed on. That helps us explain why there are fewer top carnivores because there's that energy transfer is inefficient. So by the time we get to the very tippy top of this food chain, a lot of that energy has been lost along the way. And so there's less for those top carnivores to consume. So in terms of, I'm going ahead here. So in terms of biomass, there are fewer of those things. So we're going to be doing some practice problems today, talking about that 10% getting passed on um, throughout the food chain there.